Hi, fifth grade Haas Science, Ms. Wiehl here. Today we're going to be continuing our lesson about ecosystems. Now I know that we just completed a PowerPoint all about ecosystems, different types of them, and what sort of adaptations organisms need to have in order to survive in these ecosystems. However, from here on out, we're going to be looking at these ecosystems in a different way. We're going to look at how energy flows through the ecosystems. So think about all the things that are required for an organism to survive, right? Think about the basic needs of all living things. Remember that all living things need four things. They need air, water, energy. This is the one we're going to focus on today, how energy flows through the ecosystem, and protection or shelter. So remember, when we're talking about energy, for our standards, we think about getting energy through food. So we're going to talk about how food kind of flows this energy throughout the ecosystem. So we're going to be looking at food chains and food webs, something that maybe you are familiar with already. So without further hesitation, let's dive on in. I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and we're going to go through the PowerPoint. All right, perfect. So we're going to talk about energy flowing through an ecosystem. Now, in your PowerPoint, the slides may be in a little bit different order. This may have been the last slide, but I want to go over this first because these are very important vocabulary words that I will be using throughout the narration, throughout the unit, and probably your teachers will be using these words too. So it's important that we're all on the same page. And as I'm going through them, you should be taking notes and writing these words in your own terms. Okay, don't write them out exactly as they're written. It's already there. So instead, make sure that you write it in your own words so that you know what you're talking about. All right, so let's talk about different organisms play different roles, okay? And I'm not talking about like the role you might play if you were an actor in a show, okay? But we all do have our own roles. We all fulfill certain places in our ecosystem, right? Ecosystems need predators, they need prey. They need organisms to fulfill these roles so that the ecosystem can continue, okay? You need a lot of organisms that do a lot of different things, just like your body has a lot of different parts that do a lot of different things to help you to survive. So when we're looking at different organisms, there are two main types, okay? We call them producers and consumers, okay? Look at the first word, producer. Producers are plants. They both start with P. That's one way you can remember it. Producers, think about if you go to the store, right? And you go to the produce department. What department are you going to? You're going to your plants. You're going to get the veggies and the fruits. They're producers. What does a producer mean? Producers are, means that they're making something. They're creating something. And in this case, we're talking about energy. So they're creating their own energy. And probably you remember that plants have the ability to make their own food through the process of photosynthesis. Photo meaning light, synthesis meaning putting it together. So they put together their sugar, a simple sugar called glucose, with sunlight. So because they have the ability to do that, we call them producers because they produce the original energy that can be consumed in the form that it is on our planet. Okay, so all plants are producers, and all organisms that can do photosynthesis are producers, and those are a lot of P words. So if you can remember all those P words, you'll remember that producers are plants and they do photosynthesis. The other type of organisms are called consumers, and you and I fall into this category. Consumers are organisms that actually consume and eat. So remember that consume means to eat. So we eat in order to get our energy, so we would be consumers. And most animals fall under this category because animals eat in order to get their energy. Now, when we're talking about consumers, there are three main types that we break into three different groups. You could either be an herbivore, a carnivore, or an omnivore. Herbivore has the word herb in it. Herbs are types of plants. So if you're an herbivore, you only eat plants. Think of an organism that you know that only eats plants, like a bunny, for example, right? They eat carrots, they eat grass, they don't eat meat. So they're considered herbivores. Carnivores, carn means flesh, right? Carnage. So carnivores eat meat. So organisms like a tiger or a lion, you would never see the tiger and lion walking around the forest and munching on grass. You'll never see that because those organisms don't eat plants. They only eat meat. So if you only eat meat, we call you a carnivore, right? Like the T-Rex. We know the T-Rex was a carnivore because we have fossil evidence showing its sharp teeth for ripping, gripping, shredding, tearing, and eating only meat, okay? And then the last category are omnivores. Omni means from many different sources or multiple places. So you and I would actually be in this category. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. Sometimes I like a side of salad along with my cheeseburger. So because I eat both plants and animals, I'm an omnivore, and probably you are too. So you could be, if you eat, you're a consumer, you can be a herbivore, carnivore, or omnivore. The last role that we will see in our food chains is a very special type of organism called a decomposer. You've probably heard the word decompose before. Decomposition is the process in which something gets broken down, okay? So these are special creatures that have the ability to take anything that is dead and break down dead material in order to restore the nutrients to the soil, which, if you remember, nutrients in the soil can be absorbed through the roots of a plant and would therefore be considered, you know, the circle of life. That's what we're talking about today. The circle of life. I really need some lessons. Let's move on. Okay, so if you click on this link right here, you'll actually see a video. It's a nice introductory video about food chains. So what is a food chain exactly? It's a model that shows how energy flows between living things within the same ecosystem. And all energy, you have to remember, begins with the sun. The sun provides energy for our entire planet. That is something that you need to understand before we can continue to look at where that energy travels. All energy comes from one source, and it is our sun. Remember, the sun gives us light, gives us heat. Those are type of forms of energy, right? And it also gives a lot more different types of wavelengths of energy that you're going to get into once you get into science next year, okay? So make sure that you watch this video, and let's look at this simple food chain here, okay? This may be a forest food chain. So remember that all energy comes originally from the sun, that's right. And then there are organisms on this planet that can take the energy from the sun and turn it into energy. That's the process of photosynthesis. So these organisms are producers. So if you look at our image, you can see there's a picture of a flower, and underneath it says producer, right? Plants are producers. That flower has green leaves and has taken the sun's energy and made sugar, glucose out of it, so they've produced energy. Now you'll see a red arrow that's pointing from the flower to the caterpillar. Now those arrows represent the flow of energy. Those are called energy arrows, and they point in the direction of where the food will go or where the energy will go. So you can think of it as pointing into the mouth of the creature that will be doing the eating next. So you see that the arrow goes from the flower to the caterpillar, meaning that the caterpillar will eat the flower. The energy that was in the flower, remember, the flower made its own energy, it produced its own energy. When it gets eaten by the caterpillar, all the energy goes into the mouth of the caterpillar, and the caterpillar will get that energy, just like when you or I eat food, the energy that was in the food then goes into our bodies. So we are consumers as well. So we call the caterpillar a consumer. Now, you see another arrow that's going from the caterpillar to the frog. That means that the frog will consume that caterpillar and will get the energy from the caterpillar. Okay? And so on and so forth. There's an arrow between the frog going into the mouth of the snake. The snake will be consuming the frog. And last but not least, you see one more energy arrow that goes from the snake to the owl, meaning that the owl will be eating the snake. So remember, it's where is the energy going? The energy from the snake is going into the mouth of the owl. You need to realize that those arrows don't represent who is eating who. It represents the flow of energy. Okay, so check out that video. Here's another video you're definitely going to watch. This video is about energy flows and about food chains like the one that we just went through. And it kind of explains how energy flows as organisms eat and as they are being eaten. So if you have more than one food chain, we call it a food web. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but this video describes it nicely. And it talks a little bit about the roles that organisms play within these food chains. And if you're looking just at this image here, just for the start of the video, you can see that we see these roles here that we just talked about. Producers, consumers, and decomposers, right? So this food chain looks a little bit like the last one with the addition of a decomposer. And we now have a different label. So as you can see, these labels, grasshoppers, bluebirds, snakes, and owls, they all eat in order to get energy. So they're all called consumers. But you see that we actually classify them in order of who gets the energy first. So remember, who created the energy? Well, all energy comes from the sun, but who created the food energy? Producers. So that's the original source of energy. The producer is the grass. Since the grasshopper eats the grasshopper is the first organism to get to that energy. So we would call it a primary consumer, not first-ary consumer. Primary consumer, primary means one, okay? If the grasshopper gets eaten by a bluebird, which we see that's true based off of the direction of the energy arrows, the bluebird would be the second organism to get to the energy, which was in the grass, so we call it a secondary consumer. If the bluebird gets eaten by a snake, the snake would be the third organism to get to the energy, and so we would call it a, not a third-ary consumer, we would call it a tertiary consumer. Sounds a little bit more fancy and more sciencey. Last but not least, the top dog, the one who gets to eat anything pretty much they want, would be considered the apex predator. The word apex means the tippy tip top. So like, for example, if you're walking up Mount Everest and you make it to the apex of Mount Everest, you've reached the top. So whoever's the top dog of this food chain, in this case would be the owl. The owl would be considered a quaternary consumer because it's the fourth one to get to the energy. Quaternary means four, like quarters, right? There's 4 quarters in a dollar. And it is also considered the apex predator. Now remember that everything that lives will eventually die, okay? Even though nobody's eating the owl, if the owl dies of old age and falls on the ground, there are other organisms that can break down dead things and decompose them. Those are called decomposers. And in this image, we see a fungus that looks like it will have the ability to break down whatever remains of the owl, bones, beaks, things like that, which don't typically get eaten, right? And all the nutrients in that organism will then be returned to the soil. And then what grows out of the soil? Where's the energy going to go? It's going to go from the soil to the grass, right? So as you can see, it's all one big loop. That's our circle of life. So yeah, check that on out. Now, once things get a little bit more complicated, it's not one linear line with one chain. You have multiple chains together. That's called a food web. So a food web shows many different food chains that interact and intertwine within one ecosystem. So let's say the ecosystem that we're looking at in this image, let's say that it looks like a wetland ecosystem, right? And we see the energy arrows, we see a bunch of plants, we see a bunch of primary, secondary, tertiary consumers, and even some apex predators. See how many individual food chains you can create from this one food web. And here are some good examples of these sample food chains that you might find for different ecosystems like the grassland and aquatic ecosystems like the pond and the ocean. So we're going to stop here this week. Please make sure that you look over and study all of this information. And if you have questions, reach out to me or your other teachers. Have a beautiful week. Enjoy studying food chains and food webs, and I will see you later. Bye.